Welcome to Salt Talk with your host, Dr. Hugh Jackman.
Hello and welcome to the program. Who could forget the date, September the 11th, 2001? The World Trade Center, remember it? With its two magnificent towers standing proudly on the New York Manhattan skyline. It was attacked by terrorists who flew commercial aircrafts into the building. By the end of the day, almost 3,000 people had lost their lives. Today we ask the question, where was God on 9/11? My guest, Erik Ronningen, was a survivor and eyewitness of that terrible day. He was the very last person to exit the South Tower alive. Today we welcome a man who made a harrowing escape from the Twin Towers and is the author of the book From the Inside Out. Erik Ronningen, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jackman. It's a real privilege for me. Even though almost 24 years has gone by, whenever I speak of it with folks, it's memory is an interesting attribute. It's as if it happened just yesterday. And I'm always happy to speak of it if it can be helpful to others. And it was certainly a life-changing experience for me and for many, of course. And I'm always happy to speak of it. And I used to spend almost every day post 9/11, after we erected the fence around the World Trade Center site, I would go down there every day and spend a couple of hours talking with the tourists, answering their questions, and every now and then someone would ask me if I was there, and I would say I was, and they'd want to hear the stories. And so it was just as harrowing an experience as it was, because I thought my time was up about 7 different times that morning. I knew I was going to be going to my maker, but my time was not up, as we could see speaking with you today.
Yeah, you're still here.
I am still here. Happy to be here. Thank you.
I know I've said this to you in our previous telephone call, but I just wanted to say, from my perspective, this is really an incredible moment for me to speak to someone who was actually there. I was working on the day and was one of the people around the world that was completely horrified and shocked by the events. And that evening, I remember we had to do a program to respond to the whole thing. And ever since then, I've been deeply moved by the events of 9/11. I've watched hours and hours and hours of footage. You can ask my wife about this. And I'm really, I have so many questions that I'd want to ask someone who was actually there. But could we start, Erik, by maybe going back in time to do with you? Maybe if you could give us just a quick backdrop of who you were, what were you doing in the towers, what did you do, how long had you been there, etc.
Well, yes, I was not in the towers until probably the fall of 1997, I think it was, 1996 or 1997. My best friend at the time, Douglas Karpeloff, was the security manager and director for the World Trade Center site. And I was between jobs at the time, and they were in the process of upgrading the security system from the 1993 bombings. And he knew that I knew a little something about computers, or he thought I knew something about computers. So one day in the fall of 96 or 97, he approached me and said, "Erik, I've got a proposal for you." And he spent about 15, maybe 20 minutes talking about what he needed for an access control system at the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. And I'm listening to him, I'm nodding, I'm smiling, I'm cocking my ear, saying all of the right clucks and whistles. And at the end, he asks me, "Can you do it?" And I put out my right hand and I say, "Doug, I'm your man." I went home and told my wife, Sarah, And I said, Sarah, I didn't have a clue what that man was saying to me. I didn't understand a single sentence. But I said, I need the job. I'll figure it out. Well, they hired me. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, who owned and operated the World Trade Center site. I went through all of the interviews and the processes, and they did hire me as a consultant. And I figured it out. I designed and got installed a whole new access control system for them. And that initially was going to last 7 months. It went to 2 years. And then I was transferred, and it lasted 3 additional years. And just about a month or two before I was due to leave or get hired as an employee, September 11th, 2001 happened.
Yeah. Can I ask
So
what floor did you work on when you were hired?
I was I was on the 35th floor of the South Tower when I was hired.
Okay.
The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is the agency. It's a bi-state agency that owned and operated the World Trade Center site. So they had offices in both towers and the other 5 buildings around the site also. But I started out in the South Tower, which was the second tower that was flown into,
Yeah.
and then I had offices in both towers on and off, and I was in the North Tower on September 11th.
Wow. Okay, so let's can you take us back to that terrible day? Um, everyone says that, just like behind me, it was a beautiful blue sky day. I've heard this story so many times by so many different people. Did you imagine? I wanted to ask you this question. Would you ever imagine that something like this could have happened, particularly on a day like this?
Well, it's an interesting question because after the 1993 bombing, Doug Karpoloff and his entire security staff, they spent all those years in meetings trying to anticipate what the bad guys were going to do next. So there were millions of dollars of security upgrades around the World Trade Center site. Of all the dozens and hundreds of hours of brainstorming and spending money upgrading security, who would have thought that people would steal a 757 and commit suicide by driving it into a tower, into a building?
Unbelievable.
Now those buildings were designed in the late 1960s and constructed in the 1970s. They were designed to withstand the impact of the largest airliner at the time, which was a 707. And this, of course, this aircraft was larger than a 707, but the building did not tumble over as we all think it was anticipated to do.
So when they designed it that way, I presume they were just thinking it maybe in the case of an accident, maybe an aircraft flying into the building, or do you think that they had some sense that something like this could happen?
Well, they had some sense that something like that could happen. All considerations were discussed, and they tried to protect against all the different variables, and that airliner was one. And in the design and construction of the Twin Towers, that was taken into consideration.
Well, something else about the Twin Towers that I read once is that were they actually designed to bend or to move slightly?
Yes, because hurricanes from time to time go through Lower Manhattan in New York. Those towers were designed to bend 4 feet in either direction, or in all directions. And when those 2 aircraft came in, especially on the North Tower, it was higher up, it bent further than the 4 feet in the design specifications.
That's amazing.
So it was those towers were well built.
So Erik, you got into work. I guess it was just a standard day, an ordinary day, getting to work, commuting to work. Take us back to that day. tell us the story. I'm fascinated.
Well, it was not actually, it was not an ordinary day for me because I was a consultant. I was I was going to be hired as an employee at 9 a.m. on September 11th, 2001. At 9 a.m., the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and I were going to meet with Douglas Karpiloff, who is the director of security, whose responsibilities were going to be extended to all Port Authority facilities, not just the World Trade Center. And all those facilities include, in part, JFK International Airport, LaGuardia Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, a couple of civilian business airports, includes the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, George Washington Bridge, the PATH system, which is a train subway system coming into and out of New York City. It's a big organization. So he was going to be made the security czar for all things Port Authority, and I was going to be hired at 9 a.m. that day as a Port Authority employee working for Douglas Karpiloff. We all missed that by 14 minutes. I live in Westchester County, which is 25 miles north of Manhattan. So I took Metro North, which is the train, into 42nd Street, Grand Central Terminal. Then I'd walk down and take the subway down to Lower Manhattan. When I came out of the subway system, gosh, looking up at that sky, the sky, I'd rarely seen it as clear and crisp and blue as it was on that day. Wow. And everyone in the book that I wrote made the same observation and comment about how crystal clear that sky was. So it was also a primary day in New York for voting. So not as many people were at their desks at 8:46 as there would have been on the day before or the day following. It was an American Airlines Flight 11 was flying south. And in the book, Tad Hank is on the 86th floor looking out his north window, just about to go down into one of the 6 sub-basements when something didn't catch right in his eye. And he turned back to look out over Manhattan, and he lowered his eyesight, and there was this big 757 flying very fast over Fifth Avenue, just missing the Empire State Building, coming straight for him, right to his office. And he was mesmerized watching this thing come directly at him. But
so he would have been just a couple of floors below the point of impact, right? Because I think it hit on the 93rd floor thereabout, didn't it?
It did. Well, it was aimed directly at him, but the thinking is that the pilot, one of the terrorists who was sitting at the controls, tried to get a little more speed out of it, hit the throttles, and that lifted the right wing, and it turned a little east, so it went up a couple of floors, and it missed him, and hit a few floors above him on 93.
So clearly he's one of the people that survived along with you. Is that right?
He did. He did, yes. Yeah, he has a fascinating story, which his story leads in my book about that morning.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We want to, if we can get his story as well, that's amazing. And we want to tell the viewers all about your book. We will tell them all about the book at the end of this broadcast, because we want as many people to get your book and hear more about the story. I think it's amazing. I just can't imagine what this moment could have felt like. So I want to hear it from someone who literally was there. What did it feel like?
Well, I'm preparing for my 9 a.m. meeting. My office was in the North Tower, and that's the tower with the big television antenna on it. And my office was on the south side, so I had a wonderful view of New York Harbor. But I'm preparing for the 9 a.m. meeting, and my boss, who's normally in, was not in yet, so I figured he'd be in the elevators. And at 8:46 New York time, 14 minutes before my 9 a.m. meeting, the tower was smashed, just like a boxer doing a roundhouse swing. And that tower swung south and twisted, swang back north and twisted, went south, and then came north and settled. And my goodness, people standing were thrown to the floor. Equipment was joggled off of file cabinets and hit the floor. And of course, people in the building would scream. And I immediately kicked back from my window. I was right on the windows, looking down into the plaza. And I kicked back, and when I kicked back, I could hear the roar of the plane up. My only thought was that an airliner had driven through the top of this tower.
So you thought that immediately, you thought it must be an airliner. I wanted to ask you something, sorry to keep stopping you, but when you talk about, because I've heard you talk about this testimony before and I can't imagine it, when you say the buildings shifted one way and then the other, just give us a sense of how many seconds did that take? How many seconds did it take to shift and shift back? I'm just trying to imagine what it could have been like.
It probably took, for the whole thing to twist south, go back north, south, and then center, probably 5 seconds, 5 or 6 seconds at the most. And I kicked back off the convector, which is right at the base of the windows. There's those tall, narrow windows. And I thought I was going to be slingshot through the window down to the plaza, 900 feet below. But I kicked back, and then the roar was so loud, I immediately, you know how you protect yourself? And I bent down horizontal to the floor, and I said to myself, stand up and die like a man.
I heard you say that, die like a man.
Die like a man.
Again, the roar that you talk about, what was that? Was that the sound of the aircraft? Was it an explosion? Or what are we talking about here?
Yes, all of the above. It was the aircraft coming through those 5 floors up above, the fuel exploding, because when I stood up, and immediately I stood up, I was still looking south, and a huge fireball came whooshing, sizzling, red, orange, and purple, and it was sizzling, and it exploded right outside the windows, not 20 feet from me. So that's the second time I thought I was going to leave this earth, when that fireball exploded.
So, Erik, you're on what floor?
I'm on the 71st floor.
So you're just what, a couple of 100 feet below the explosion, or is it less than that?
I am 2/3 of a football field below it, which is 200 feet, which seems like a lot, but look pace off 200 feet. It's just I'm looking at the curb across the street.
Yeah,
it's close.
scary.
Yeah, it's very close. Yeah, and then of course the people on the floor, they were about 1 acre floors. Everyone said, evacuate the building, evacuate the building. And the smoke started to come in, and I had just finished a 20-ounce cup of coffee, and I knew it was going to be a long morning. So I went to the men's room, took care of business, and came back to my desk, and I noticed one of our consultants, a young lady, was in the cubicle facing east. She had her hands on the desk and she had her head bowed, and I went over to her and put my hands on her shoulder and said, "Whitney, are you okay?" And she said, "I'm just packing up my laptop." And I said, "Well, I'll escort you down." Well, she left. There were 3 stairwells in each of the twin towers, And so she left to start walking down one of the stairwells, and I went back to my desk to pack up my 2 years of backups for the rail train project out at Newark Liberty International Airport that I was working on at the time. And then I couldn't find her. Smoke was beginning to fill the 71st floor. As I got to the core of the building where the elevators and stairwells were, the carpets were all squishy and wet. And I went and listened at the elevator shafts, and I could hear water coming down one of the shafts. And I called Whitney's name out, opened the ladies' room door and called her name out, and just went into the nearest stairwell. My initial thought was to go up to provide what help I could, because I knew there were problems up above. But the flow of people down those staircases was just impossible to go up.
I
So
heard
I
you
said a
say
little
that in
prayer.
your testimony, Eric, and I thought, what in the world? Why would you even think that, to go up to help people? You're a good man. I tell you, and you seem quite calm when you're telling what happened. Were you actually calm?
I actually was at the time. Yes, I knew it was time to leave, but people needed help, so I wanted to go up to give a hand. But the flow of people was just massive. The entire tower was evacuating. So I just turned around and started down, keeping my pace with everybody. And then somehow I eventually ran into Whitney, who had been in that same staircase. So she and I escorted each other down. And that
Okay, so
was
I've
just
got
the
another
beginning of,
question. Sorry, I got to keep
yeah.
asking these questions. I've heard so many people tell these accounts, but I'm always wanting to know, how many people would have been in the building at the point of the impact? Now, obviously, there were some above the impact who sadly couldn't get out, but how many? What are we talking
Yes.
about? How many people? People talk about the stairs being so busy. What are we talking about here?
Well, on a normal day, each tower held around 25,000 people.
Oh my goodness,
Now,
yeah.
it was Tuesday, and it was a primary day, so it wasn't quite as filled with people as it would have been on a normal day. So there were probably easily 15,000 people on each tower, and the only way out was to go down the stairs. The elevators, the, the elevators were all severed, so there was no going down elevators. I only know of 2 cases, and there may be more, where people survived in the elevators.
All right, now you're in the stairwell,
Mm.
and I've heard you tell about the experience. But all right, here's where I'm thinking what people are thinking who are watching the broadcast right now. You got maybe 10, 12, 13,000 people all trying to make their way out of the building. There's smoke
Yes.
in there, right? There's smoke in there.
There,
Is this
there, there are pockets of smoke. It's not completely full of smoke, but there
right?
were pockets of smoke, and it was interesting because you'd hit a pocket of smoke and there was no breathing, because that was from the aviation, the burning of the aviation fuel that somehow got down all there, and you could not breathe. So everybody's pulling out handkerchiefs and whatever material they can to cover their face and mouth to try to breathe. And there were 4 or 5 pockets that I wasn't so sure we were going to make it through some of those pockets of aviation fuel, but
Yeah,
we did. We did.
you,
Here I am.
you did.
Um, and as we went down the stairwells, every floor had a landing so you could get out into the other floors. The further down we went, the bigger the pile on each floor of jackets and clothing, and people were taking off everything they could. It was also very hot coming down those stairwells, and it took me about not quite an hour to get down from the 71st floor, and that was interesting. There were
Yeah.
people that were resting and people who were trying to help other folks. Uh, one of the women was in a wheelchair. I asked if she needed any help, and she already had 6 men they put the whole wheelchair up on their shoulders that were carrying her down. Um, Everyone was assisting everybody. It was just a fabulous experience in that regard, where everyone came to everyone's aid if they could.
That's amazing. I've heard that from many people, and it just blesses me so much to think that in the face of such horror and terror. Um, Let me ask you this: did people? This is a stupid question, but did people think that the building might fall down while you were in the stairwell? Were people thinking that way?
I don't know, Hugh. I don't know if they were thinking that because it was extremely calm and
Yeah,
quiet. No one talked. Everyone kept their thoughts to themselves. It was remarkably quiet with all those thousands of people coming down the stairs.
yeah,
It wasn't until we got probably 7 or 8 floors from exiting into the mezzanine level, which would help lead us outdoors, that people began to get a little antsy because it slowed down. It would accordion, and there was no progress. So people would snap about getting the line moving. But it was very quiet. Um, I think there was divine assistance in that, keeping
yeah.
everyone calm and quiet. In addition to the smoke, we couldn't talk with all that smoke in those little pockets. So,
That's amazing. So that's the first place that I hear from you that when people ask the question, "Where was God on 9/11?" He was in those stairwells, just keeping people calm. So now from a listener's point of view, the question is, I don't know what the building was actually made up of. So when you say you got all the way down, was that down to the ground level, to the front door, or was there another level that you reached? Can you paint a picture of that for us?
yes, yes. The exit was on the mezzanine level,
Yeah,
which that level was the level of the courtyard, 5-acre courtyard with the big fountain with the modern atlas above the fountain, and through the courtyard you could see all of the other towers and the other 6 buildings of the World Trade Center, and then below that was the main lobby where people would come in from the mall and from all of the subway exits.
right.
So there are tens of thousands of people going through the mall. So I exited on the mezzanine level, and there was all of the security folks had set barriers of bodies shoulder to shoulder to walk between, and they wouldn't let you out of that little tunnel trying to get us out of the building. But because I knew that my best friend Doug Karpoloff was probably in the operations command center in the basement of the South Tower, and coming down the stairs, none of us knew that the South Tower had been hit. Also,
So the
at that time,
south, while you were in the stairs, the south tower was
yeah,
actually hit.
yes,
So did you
yes,
feel
no,
you didn't feel any impact from the south tower?
no, did not feel a thing from that. We were in the center core of the tower, so uh, I heard one woman yell, "Another plane has hit the towers." Well, I thought it was just some hysterical person,
Yeah.
and she had a Walkman in her ear, and she was, I guess, listening to the news, and the reference was to the aircraft coming into the South Tower. But I didn't know that until I actually got out of the towers, which was still some time away. But I got to the mezzanine level. Took almost an hour. I broke through the line of security personnel and walked to the north side of the mezzanine, and I put my feet right at the base of the windows and looked out, and what a view! the debris from up above was just raining down, and it was like a black and white photograph, even though, of course, we're looking in color. And directly at my feet were 3 bodies, all pretzeled, one of them leaning against the glass window, another on top of that person, a few others. And then as I raised my eyesight and looked from left to right, I could see more bodies and debris. I said, "Oh my goodness, this is worse than any of the scenarios we've been trying to avoid since the '93 bombing." And I went and walked to the east side.
So Eric, I got to stop you on that point, if I may.
Yes.
Talk to us about these bodies that you saw. You mentioned that they look like pretzels. I heard you say that before. Are we talking about the unfortunate people who had found themselves above the point of the impact and had made a choice to jump out? Are these the people that you are now seeing?
Yes. These are the people that are escaping the melting heat and the lack of oxygen. And they're just trying to get a breath of fresh air. And they were over. I don't think an exact number has ever been established. But there were, if recall is correct, there were over 300 jumpers jumping out of those towers, just trying to get a breath of fresh air. Coming down the stairwell, I saw immediately a woman that was exposed, probably from the 77th floor lobby. She was holding her arms out horizontal, and she was being escorted, but no one was touching her. The flesh under her arms was hanging like laundry. You couldn't touch her, because you'd touch and it would stick and you'd pull the skin away. Now the heat was just unbearable up there. Yeah. There are hundreds of stories on that, certainly. But these were the jumpers that I was seeing. And then I went to the east side.
So, I don't remember if it was your testimony, if it was somebody else. I actually heard about somebody who actually saw somebody as they were falling down, and just for a split second, they caught each other's eye as the person. Did you hear about that?
That's in my book. And that was me.
It was you.
I went to the east side now, and I'm looking out over where the fountain is, and I'm just looking around, and it's raining all of this paper and debris and more bodies that I can see. And as I'm standing there, coming down absolutely 100% horizontal, facing the windows, facing where I'm standing, is a gentleman in his suit, and for an instant, he stopped, we made eye contact, and then he continued, and the sound of a shotgun discharging, and then fluids all on the window in front of me, dripping down.
You know, Eric, I watched my mum when she had a stroke, and it took me literally at least maybe a couple of months to get the image out of my head. I just kept seeing it over and over again. How long did it take you to get those images out of your head, or do you still see them?
It's a good question. I haven't seen them for a number of years, but for a number of years, and it did not happen every night. But Hugh, I would see that image of that gentleman and I making eye contact when I'm saying my nightly prayers.
Wow.
Suddenly, I'd see him there hovering, and we'd made eye contact, and then down. Didn't happen every night, but it happened frequently enough.
Yeah.
But I knew I had to get down to help my friend. He needed all the help he could get because I worked for him for 2 years before I was had moved over to the North Tower. And I said to myself, this is bigger than any scenario we were trying to plan against since the '93 bombing. And my friend needs help down in the Operations Command Center in the basement of the South Tower. So my goal now is to get into the basement of the South Tower to give him a hand with the evacuation in the command center. And the security personnel who were shoulder to shoulder, they did not like the fact that I was not obeying their orders to step back in line. And that's understandable, of course. But I'm an old security guy too, so I just ignored them. And when I got down into the main lobby of the North Tower, good Lord, the view, the lights were out, the giant signage was dangling on a single chain. I looked at the elevator doors, many of them were blown out, and there was just water and debris everywhere. And there were about 18 revolving doors that went out into the mall, all blown out. So I walked through the revolving doors and turned right to go to the South Tower, and the water is up to my ankles. There's water everywhere. And of course, only emergency lighting is on. And I break through the line again, and I'm being yelled at, and I just ignore them. And I know the stairwell behind Ben and Jerry's, just before the entrance to the South Tower, to take me down into the basements.
Yeah.
And as I get there, there are probably a half dozen firemen, another 4 or 5 policemen, and they're all yelling at me to tell me to evacuate the building. And of course, I totally ignore them. And I'd forgotten what I looked like. I was in my blue pinstripe suit because I was going to be hired that morning at 9 a.m. as an employee. I had my black Florsheim shoes spit shined, and coming down the stairs in the teens because the water pouring down through the walls and down the stairs, I didn't want my shoes or my trousers to get wet. So I leaned down and rolled my trousers up above my knees because God forbid I get my trousers wet. And so there I am, and I've got a little teeny black fabric briefcase that I threw the backups of our 2-year project in. And they're all yelling at me to leave, and I said, I'm not leaving. I'm going down to the command center to give a hand. Well, they finally said, okay, you could go down, but you have to wait. We're bringing equipment up. Well, as I'm waiting, and I'm not waiting very long, Hugh, I'm only there a minute maybe, my whole body starts to dance. I'm like my toes, I'm just dancing. I had to move, I had to do something. So I knew another way down from the lobby of the South Tower. So I went into the lobby of the South Tower, totally evacuated. No lighting. It's like New York City had been evacuated 10 years ago. Nothing, nobody. So I went all the way to the west side to look to see if anyone was there. Went to the center and looked down the center elevators. Elevator doors blowing out. Went to the north side to the fire command desk. Nobody. No emergency personnel. Nobody was there. And my body, after climbing down 142 flights of stairs at 58 or 57 years of age,
Yeah.
it's really aching.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a low-throated groaning grinding within the tower, the South Tower. I was too exhausted to consider what it might have been. I exited back into the mall and waited all the way to the other side, walked up the escalator, went out onto Church Street, and there are thousands and thousands of people on Church Street. And again, the security guard said, keep walking, don't look back, keep walking. Of course, don't look back is an open invitation. So I stepped out of line, turned around and looked back, and there was the South Tower, fully engulfed in flames also. And all those people, thousands of people that were evacuating all of lower Manhattan, were all gawking on Church Street, just looking up. And I was looking up too, but I figured, well, I couldn't go up to help above the 71st floor, but I can certainly go down to the base of the towers and see if there's any help that I can provide. And so I'm marching south on Church Street. Just as I'm about to turn right to go west, to go between the towers, a little voice in my head said, walk east. My right foot came down. I did a military left flank. I walked maybe 8 or 10 or 12 paces, and the earthquake started.
Take two. Take 2 and 2, 1. This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
I thought Church Street was going to collapse into the subway system with me and a million other people on it. And I managed to turn around to the roar, and I watched the South Tower collapse. Hugh, for just an instant, just the most quick instant, I thought the tower was going to fall down on me and kill us. And in the same instant, I said to myself, if it does, it does. There's no way you can outrun a quarter-mile high building coming down. Now, those thousands of people instantly went into a stampede. And I don't know where I learned this, Hugh, but I knew you never wanted to get caught up in a stampede of any sort. And people also. So I matched my pace to theirs, worked my way to the Millennium Hotel, tucked myself behind the columns of the loading dock, and watched everyone, arms flailing, running by as fast as they could. Loafers were flying through the air. And I noticed at one point, before I got myself tucked in there were splotches of blood on the street. Couldn't figure out what the splotches of blood were. Well, when I saw those loafers flying, I immediately knew that those feet that were being cut from the glass and the shrapnel from the North Tower when it was hit. There was a collapse everywhere. And so I tucked myself behind the column. Everyone ran by. When most of the traffic had stopped, I stepped back out. I turned west to go back to the towers. I know people need help, but as I'm stepping west, I'm frozen in place by that 800-foot high pyroclastic-like cloud of dust and debris and everything that was pulverized inside those towers. And I said to myself, I don't think I can survive one more of these incidences. I was so exhausted. My body was so exhausted. I didn't think I could make it. I turned around and I did not run, but I could walk pretty fast. As I'm walking, trying all of the merchants' doors to see if I could get indoors, everything was locked. No door to get into. And I kept an eye on that cloud. And just as the cloud was about to hit, I took a big, deep breath. And it was like you could feel the cloud hit.
Like a physical impact.
a physical impact, and then it went 100% black. All of the screaming of those thousands of people, and there was a lot of screaming, everything was silent, absolutely silent. And you couldn't breathe. I'm holding my breath, and I keep walking, and I hear that voice once more telling me to walk east because I'd stopped. And so I kept on walking east, and I didn't know if I was going to be trampled or get run over by a truck. It was pitch black and no noise at all. I walked and I kept walking. Finally, I had to breathe, and I took a couple of big inhales. Everything clogged up. Eyes froze open with all the grit. My nostrils were totally impacted. My mouth was, well, mouth was like, remember when we were 5 years old, we tried to eat sand in the sandbox?
Yeah.
My ears were clogged, and I just kept walking, and finally, I'd gone as far as I could go. My knees were collapsing. I was bending down. My knees were collapsing down to the sidewalk. And I said, well, I'm going to meet my maker. And just as I'm halfway down, just off to my right, was a little fuzziness that was against the pattern of this cloud. So I just gave it my all and stood up and turned to that little fuzziness, put my arm out, and it was a man opening the back door of a delicatessen. So I followed him in, and the deli staff were handing out water and juices. And I took one, and I took a big gulp and flushed that plug down, and I could breathe again. It wasn't my time to go, not yet.
So that's just like the experience of it it's like you're taking us into the experience, which is amazing. It must have felt like hell on earth when you said it went pitch black. I mean, the light's gone. Everything's gone.
It's gone. I put my hand up like this to touch my nose.
You couldn't see it.
And I couldn't see my hand. I could not see my hand. And it was a beautiful day. It was a magnificently beautiful, crystal clear blue day. Pitch
And
black.
when you said that, Erik, that you knew then at that point that you were going to meet your maker at that point, did you start to pray? What was your reaction? Did you think, am I ready to meet him? What? Take us a little bit deeper into that thought.
Well, I did say a prayer just before I stepped into the stairwell to exit the 71st floor. I asked that I be assisted to have sufficient strength to get down the stairs.
Yeah.
People think going up and down stairs is easy, but 142 flights of 10 and 11 and 12 stairs per flight, that's a lot of flick. And I was 56 or 57 at the time. I was in pretty good shape, but I wasn't 142 flights of stairs in shape. I had blisters on my feet, and I was so exhausted.
So you've had some water in the delicatessen, but that's the south tower that came down, right? So there was still, because the second, if I remember correctly, the second tower to get hit was the south tower, but it was the first one to collapse.
Correct.
You had come out of the north tower, gone over to the south tower. Now the south tower had collapsed.
Yes.
What then happened? Did you get out before the north tower collapsed? What happened then?
Well, I did, just because that little voice in my head, which was one of the Lord's angels,
Oh man.
you know, and you know this better than I, Hugh, that no one dies before their set time, and I've got 100 examples from that day alone. And we could talk about that at some point if you
No,
like.
that's a really interesting point. We're going to pick up on that one.
And if it's not one's time to die, one of the Lord's angels is dispatched, and we're taken out of or pushed out of harm's way. And that was that voice in my head. I was going between the towers, and that voice said, "Walk east."
Yeah.
There was no question to challenge the voice. There was no question but to do exactly what that voice said. And I don't follow directions easily.
Yeah.
And my right foot came down. I did a military left flank, and I'm walking east. And I would have been between those towers. There was no distinction between male or female. It was a calm, quiet, authoritative walk east.
Wow.
And I did. And I heard that voice 4 or 5 times because I kept trying to come back to the towers.
Can I just ask you this, Eric? Have you ever heard that voice prior to that day, and have you ever heard the voice since that day?
I like your question. I'm thinking. I don't know. I no longer recall if I heard it prior to then or previous to then. But gosh, this gets into such a fascinating area about prayer and the answers to prayer. I've got fabulous examples for those.
Yeah.
But I've been kept out of harm's way a number of times in my lifetime where it's been very obvious that if I had not stopped or whatever, you and I wouldn't be talking today. But ifs don't matter when it's not one's time to die. You do not die.
Oh my God, there it goes!
And in the next 6 months, trying to get things back to normal again, gosh, every one of us that were in those towers, we all worked together. And so we were hearing everybody's stories over and over. And not everybody survived the aftershock. A very good friend of mine, after 6 months, he just had a total breakdown. And he's never returned. I've seen him a couple times. We've had lunch. But it was terrible on him. And I knew from the very beginning that I was not going to let this incident run my life. I was going to run my life. Yeah. And it's still a work in progress, but I refuse to give in to any of that. It wasn't easy. If I'm walking under my local railroad trestle, it's right down here. You can't see me pointing to it, but it's right over there. If I'm walking under it and the express train goes over it, it's very hard. It sounds like the plane coming in up just 200 feet above me. So, and it took me years. I would take the train into the city to go to work. I had to go on the platform. I had to go all the way to the back to the rail and turn around, put my back to the tracks, and hold on to the rail. And just take a breath, let it out slowly, calm, quiet, when the express trains would go by. Sounded like the towers coming down. Wow. I did that every day for months and months, and then I turned around and faced the tracks, putting my hand on the rails behind me for months and months. And then I took one step forward. The sound was, oof. It just imbued itself into memory, and it was there every time it went by. I'm a person that, from my earliest memories, that loves thunder. Oh my gosh, I run out to the top of a hill when there's a lightning storm as a kid, and even as an adult, because I love the thunder. There's certain kinds of thunder. Hugh, a grown man, you'd see this grown man cowering under the sheets when there was that certain kind of thunder.
Wow.